I didn't argue when my son told me I would be moving to a nursing home. He stood in my living room with his arms crossed, speaking slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "You can't live alone anymore," he said. "It's not safe. We already found a place for you." I looked around the house I had lived in for 43 years. My wife's photo was still on the mantel. Her garden was blooming outside the window, and my son was calmly deciding that none of it belonged to me anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offend myself. I simply nodded. What he didn't know was that the lawyer he had never met was already on his way. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 72 years old. For most of my life, I believe my greatest achievement was my family. I worked 35 years as an electrician. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. I built a life with my wife, Margaret. She had a soft laugh that filled every room. If I closed my eyes, I could still hear it. Together we raised one son, Daniel. He was born during a snowstorm in February. I remember holding him in the hospital and promising Margaret I would give him everything I never had. And for most of his life, I tried. When Daniel was young, he was kind, curious. He used to follow me around the house with a little plastic toolbox. Whenever I fixed something, he insisted on helping. "Hold a flashlight, Dad," he would ask, even when he was barely tall enough to reach the switch. Margaret used to smile and say, "He worships you." I didn't think about it much back then. Life was busy. Bills, school, work, repairs. The normal rhythm of a family. But those were good years. Quiet years. Everything changed the year Margaret got sick. It started with small things. Fatigue, doctor visits, tests. Then one afternoon, the doctor said a word no family ever wants to hear. Cancer. I remember Margaret squeezing my hand in that office. She didn't cry. She only asked one question. "How long?" The doctor avoided her eyes. That's when I knew. Margaret fought for 2 years. Too long. Painful years. Through surgeries. Through chemotherapy. Through nights when she couldn't sleep because the pain kept her awake. Daniel visited sometimes, but his visits became shorter, busier. He always had somewhere else to be. Work, friends, plans. Margaret never complained about it, but I noticed. A father notices things. The night Margaret died, it was raining. She was lying in the hospital bed we had set up in our living room. Her breathing was shallow. I sat beside her holding her hand. She looked at me with tired eyes. "Robert," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. You're going to be okay." I tried to smile, but she shook her head gently. "You're stronger than you think," she said. Then she closed her eyes. And just like that, 47 years of marriage ended in a single quiet moment. The house felt different after that. Too quiet. The mornings were the hardest. Margaret used to make coffee before I woke up. After she was gone, the kitchen felt like an empty museum. Daniel started visiting more often then. At first, I thought he was worried about me. He began asking questions about the house, about the bills, about my finances. "Dad, have you thought about simplifying things?" he asked one afternoon. "What do you mean?" "Well, this house is a lot for someone your age." I laughed. "I built half of this place myself." I said, "I think I can manage." But Daniel didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly. A few months later, he brought his wife with him, Emily. She had always been polite, but something about her smile had changed. It felt rehearsed. They sat across from me at the kitchen table. Emily folded her hands neatly. "You've done a wonderful job maintaining the house," she said. That sentence sounded like the beginning of something else. "And?" I asked. Daniel cleared his throat. "We think it might be time to consider other living arrangements." I looked at them carefully. "Other arrangements?" Emily leaned forward slightly. "A retirement community," she said. "They're very comfortable, very safe." "I'm not looking for safety," I replied. "I'm looking for peace." Daniel sighed. "Dad, you're not getting younger." I noticed. He rubbed his forehead. "This isn't easy for us either." That sentence surprised me. Not easy for them? They weren't the ones being asked to leave their home. After that conversation, Daniel began visiting more frequently, but the visits felt different. He wasn't coming to see me. He was studying the house, measuring rooms, taking photos. Once I walked into the living room and found him opening drawers. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just looking," he said quickly. That's when something in my chest shifted, a quiet suspicion. One evening, I overheard Daniel talking to Emily in the hallway. They didn't know I was awake. "The property alone is worth at least $700,000, Emily whispered. Daniel responded quietly, "I know. We can't wait forever." My heart slowed, not in shock, but in understanding. That's when I realized something important. My son wasn't worried about my safety. He was worried about my house. I didn't confront him. Instead, I started paying closer attention. Daniel began bringing documents, forms, insurance papers, just routine updates, he said. One afternoon, he placed a folder in front of me. "We should organize your affairs," he explained. "What kind of affairs?" "Power of attorney, medical decisions, that sort of thing." I opened the folder slowly, and there it was, hidden inside the stack. Property transfer paperwork. He thought I wouldn't notice. But when you've spent decades reading electrical diagrams, you learn to spot details. I closed the folder gently. "Let me think about it," I said. Daniel looked disappointed, but he smiled anyway. "Of course, Dad." Over the next few weeks, the pressure increased. Emily called more often. Daniel talked about planning ahead. Then one morning, he arrived unannounced. He stood in the doorway holding a brochure. "A nursing home," he said. "Just a visit." "I'm not visiting a nursing home." "You should at least look." "No." His face hardened. For the first time in his life, Daniel looked at me like I was an obstacle. 3 days later, he returned. This time he wasn't asking. He stood in the living room with Emily beside him. "You'll live in a nursing home now," he said. Just like that. No discussion. No respect. A decision about my life. In my house. I looked at my son for a long moment. He looked confident, certain. Emily stood behind him quietly. I realized something in that moment. They believed I was powerless. An old man, alone, confused, easy to move, easy to control. I nodded slowly. "All right," I said. Their relief was immediate. Emily smiled. Daniel exhaled. They thought the conversation was over, but in truth, it had only just begun. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had already made a phone call. A call Daniel didn't know about. A call Margaret had once told me to make if I ever needed help. To a man named Thomas Avery, Margaret's lawyer. Thomas Avery had handled Margaret's family estate for years. He was precise, quiet, observant. When I called him, he listened carefully. Then he asked one question. "Mr. Hayes, do you feel pressured?" "Yes," I said. There was a pause on the line. "Then we should meet." We met the next morning. Thomas read through every document Daniel had given me. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He simply turned each page slowly. When he finished, he folded his hands. "Your son is attempting to obtain control of your assets. I assumed as much. But he cannot do so without your consent." I nodded. "That's good." Thomas looked at me carefully. "But I recommend we prepare something else." "What kind of preparation?" I asked. Thomas leaned forward slightly. "Protection." Over the next week, we made several quiet arrangements. Legal arrangements. Financial arrangements. And one very important document. A document that would only matter if Daniel forced the situation. And now, that moment had arrived. Daniel stood in my living room again. "Pack what you need," he said. "We're taking you to the facility tomorrow." I nodded calmly. Emily looked satisfied. Then I heard a knock on the front door. Daniel frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "Yes," I said. He looked confused. I walked slowly to the door and opened it. Thomas Avery stepped inside, carrying a leather briefcase. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes." Daniel stared at him. "Who is this?" I closed the door gently. "This," I said calmly, "is the lawyer." And suddenly, the room became very quiet. Thomas placed his briefcase on the table. He opened it slowly. Then he removed a stack of documents. Mr. Daniel Hayes. He said politely, I believe we should discuss your father's property. Daniel crossed his arms. What about it? Thomas looked directly at him. As of 2 weeks ago, your father placed his house into a protected family trust. Daniel blinked. What? Thomas continued calmly. This means the property cannot be sold, transferred, or controlled by anyone except Mr. Hayes. Emily's smile disappeared. That's ridiculous, she said. Thomas slid a document across the table. It is legally binding. Daniel's face turned pale. You can't do that without telling us. I looked at him quietly. Yes, I said, I can. But that wasn't the only surprise. Thomas opened another folder. There is also a clause here regarding elder coercion. Daniel looked confused. What does that mean? Thomas spoke evenly. It means any attempt to pressure Mr. Hayes into surrendering his assets may result in legal consequences. Emily stepped back slightly. Daniel looked at me. You called a lawyer on your own son? I met his eyes calmly. No, I said. I protected myself from a man who forgot how to treat his father. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavy. Daniel looked around the house. The house he thought he was about to own. But something else had changed in that moment. Power. The quiet balance had shifted. Thomas closed his briefcase. Mr. Hayes, he said gently, I believe my work here is finished. He stood and shook my hand. Then he walked toward the door. Daniel didn't follow him. He stood in the middle of the living room staring at the floor. Emily avoided my eyes. For the first time in weeks, no one was telling me what to do. Eventually, Daniel spoke. Dad, we were just trying to help. I nodded slowly. I know, but the truth is, help doesn't begin with taking someone's home. They left shortly after. No shouting, no drama, just quiet footsteps leaving the house. That night, I sat on the porch Margaret loved so much. The sun was setting behind the trees. The garden she planted years ago was still blooming. I thought about family, about trust, about how easily both can change. Margaret once told me something I didn't fully understand at the time. She said, kind people are often mistaken for weak ones. But she was right. Quiet strength doesn't shout. It waits. I don't know what will happen with Daniel. Maybe time will teach him something. Maybe it won't. But I know this much. Respect cannot be inherited. It has to be earned. And sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones holding the strongest hand. I sat on the porch long after the sun disappeared. The evening air had grown cool, but I didn't go inside. Margaret used to say the quiet hours after sunset were the most honest moments of the day. No distractions, no pretending, just your thoughts and the truth you carry with you. That night, my thoughts were heavy, not because of anger, but because of disappointment. A father does not expect to prepare legal protection from his own son. Yet there I was, 72 years old, sitting in a house I built, defending it from a boy I once carried on my shoulders. The next morning, the house felt unusually peaceful. No tension, no arguments, no quiet footsteps in the hallways searching through drawers. I made coffee slowly, just like Margaret used to. The smell filled the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I had been missing. Control. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. I already knew who it was. Daniel. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Hello. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then Daniel spoke. You didn't have to embarrass us like that. His voice wasn't angry. It was wounded, which surprised me. Embarrass you? I said calmly. Yes. Bringing a lawyer. Making it sound like we were criminals. I took a slow breath. Daniel, you tried to take my home. Another pause. That's not what we were doing, he said. We were helping you. That word again. Helping. It's interesting how easily people use that word when they want control. Helping would have been asking. I replied. Helping would have been listening when I said no. Daniel sighed. You're being stubborn. No, I said gently. I'm being clear. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel said something that surprised me. Emily is really upset. I almost smiled. Your wife wanted my house, I said, "Of course she's upset. That's not fair, isn't it?" Daniel's voice hardened. "You're pushing us away." That sentence stayed with me for a moment. Then I answered slowly, "No, Daniel, you pushed yourself away the moment you stopped seeing me as your father and started seeing me as paperwork." He didn't respond. A few seconds later, the call ended, just like that. A conversation between father and son reduced to silence. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Daniel didn't call again. Emily certainly didn't. But something else happened. Something I hadn't expected. People started visiting. First, it was my neighbor, Harold. He had lived across the street for 20 years. He brought a small box of pastries. "I heard some raised voices the other day." He said carefully, "Everything all right?" I smiled. "Everything's under control now." He nodded slowly. "Good." Then he looked around the living room. "This house has good bones," he said. "Would be a shame if someone tried to push you out of it." I didn't ask how he knew. In neighborhoods like ours, people notice things. Later that afternoon, another neighbor stopped by, Mrs. Collins. She had been Margaret's closest friend. She carried a small basket of tomatoes from her garden. "I just wanted to check on you," she said softly. I thanked her. Then we sat in the kitchen for a while. At one point, she looked at me carefully. "Margaret always worried about this house," she said. "What do you mean?" She used to say... Mrs. Collins hesitated. Then she continued. "She used to say Daniel didn't love the house the way you did." That sentence lingered in the air. Not cruel, just honest. Mrs. Collins placed her hand gently over mine. "Margaret trusted you to protect what you both built." I nodded quietly. "I intend to." 3 days later, something unexpected happened. Daniel came back. He arrived in the late afternoon. Alone. No Emily. No confidence in his posture this time. Just a tired man standing on my porch. When I opened the door, he looked older somehow. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat in the living room, the same room where everything had happened. For a while, Daniel just stared at the floor. Then he spoke. "I didn't realize you felt that way." I leaned back in my chair. "What way?" "Like we were trying to take advantage of you." I studied his face carefully. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you brought property transfer papers into my house." He nodded slowly. "Yes." Then he said something honest. "Emily pushed the idea." I wasn't surprised, but I didn't react. "Did she force you to bring the papers?" I asked. "No." "Did she force you to tell me I was moving into a nursing home?" Daniel shook his head. "No." I nodded. "Then the responsibility is still yours." That was a difficult moment for him. I could see it in his eyes. Sometimes the hardest thing for a person is admitting they were wrong, especially to their own father. "I thought," he began. Then he stopped. "You thought what?" I asked gently. "I thought you would eventually give us the house anyway." There it was. The truth. Not cruelty. Not hatred. Just expectation. A quiet belief that what I owned would naturally become his. That belief is more common than people realize. But it's also dangerous because it replaces gratitude with entitlement. "Daniel," I said slowly, "this house may become yours someday." His head lifted slightly. "But not because you pressured me. Not because you assumed it. And certainly not because you tried to move me out of it." He nodded. "I understand." For the first time in weeks, he sounded sincere. Then he looked around the room. "This place means a lot to you, doesn't it?" I smiled softly. "It means a lot to your mother." Daniel stayed for about 30 minutes. We didn't argue. We didn't solve everything either. Some wounds take longer to heal. But something had changed. For the first time since Margaret died, Daniel spoke to me like a son again, not like a real estate investor. When he left, he paused at the door. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." Then he walked his car and drove away. That night, I sat on the porch again. The stars were bright. The garden rustled softly in the breeze. Margaret used to love nights like that. I imagined her sitting beside me, listening, smiling. I thought about everything that had happened, about betrayal, about anger, about quiet revenge. But in the end, the most powerful thing wasn't the lawyer, or the documents, or the trust protecting the house. It was something much simpler. Boundaries. People often believe strength means fighting loudly, but real strength is quieter than that. It's the ability to stand calmly and say, "No, this is where the line is. I'm still living in this house today. The same porch, the same garden, the same memories." Daniel visits sometimes, not as often as Margaret would have liked, but often enough. And now, when he walks through the door, he looks at the house differently, not like something he owns, but like something he must respect, because, in the end, family is not measured by inheritance. It is measured by how we treat each other while we're still here. And sometimes, the most important thing a father can teach his son is that dignity is never something you surrender, even to family.